Good morning and welcome to St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Meredith Ward and I'm on the clergy team here. And on behalf of all of us at St. Bart's, it's my joy to welcome you to the forum where each Sunday we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. This morning we're coming to you virtually as we welcome Professor Graham Bullock, Associate Professor of Political Science and Faculty Director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative at Davidson College. This morning, Professor Bullock will speak to us about deliberative citizenship, constructively facing society's problems, and he'll propose a more constructive approach to dialogue about important social and political issues. Professor Bullock, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Meredith, and it's an honor to be here with you today. Wish I could be there with you in person, but nevertheless, it's great to be able to join you virtually. I'm going to, in a moment, share my screen so that you can see some slides that hopefully will be helpful in kind of introducing you to the sort of ideas of deliberative citizenship and really the sort of the why, the how, and the what of it through the lens of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative that I'm the faculty director of at Davidson College. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully this works. And I'm going to sort of center my talks, at least initially, around and then towards the end as well, around the concepts of justice, kindness, and humility, which I think provide a really useful way to think about both the challenges and possibilities of deliberative citizenship. Okay, so here we go. So this is a print of the prophet Micah chastising the people of Samaria and Jerusalem for their moral failings. And in the book of Micah, he talks a lot and very strongly about how the people of Samaria and Jerusalem have sinned and rebelled against God. Micah 3:2, you who hate good and love evil, who tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones, God is angry with you. And the core issue is that they are not worshiping God and not caring about others. They are being selfish and practicing idolatry. And so this kind of story from the Bible was introduced to me by a friend and a pastor at Davidson College Presbyterian Church as a sort of interesting lens by which to think about some of the challenges we have today. And as you can think about it, what does this resonate at all with any of you? Thinking about idolatry, sort of generally speaking, political idolatry, secular or market idolatry, or tribal or identity idolatry, putting things before our connection with our fellow humans and with God. And this is the world that we are currently navigating, all of these different sort of pressures on us and pulls on our allegiances, and that our kids and children are growing up in and are going to grow up in. And so we can think about this challenge, these issues, in modern terms, as a problem of citizenship. Though we can think of it as that we're not really being good citizens. So what is citizenship? So I like to think of citizenship as a ship, as a ship of people who are working together to solve the challenges that face society. And then we can think of deliberation, as a structured discourse focused on building both shared and new understandings of a particular issue that transcend previously held positions and enable collective decisions and actions as citizens together. And this sort of form of discourse is distinct from other forms of discourse. And I can provide you some very detailed definitions, but I like to kind of use a geographic metaphor for explaining these kind of different forms of discourse. So the first is conversation. We're just on a kind of landscape. We're talking about the weather, the sports, what happened last night in the playoffs, whatever, jumping around. But then maybe we pick something more specific, a specific topic, and then we start having a discussion on it. Let's say abortion, and we sort of map the landscape. What different positions on this landscape do people hold? And just trying to understand, the sort of range of views. And then we might start to dig deeper, go underground, right? Mining for why people hold those positions on that landscape. What evidence, what stories, what life experiences inform those positions. And then we might start evaluating those positions, comparing, contrasting, providing arguments for why this position, I actually agree with. I think that's a really good point. This maybe not so much, and this is why. And this is moving from discussion to dialogue to debate, and then finally to deliberation, which is transcending that landscape, building something new, some new ideas, perhaps, some new policies that maybe we didn't have when we came into the conversation. And so my analogy here is, with playing Monopoly, we're all sort of building little houses on this landscape. And then suddenly somebody says, let's try something new. Let's build a hotel, something different, right? Or maybe play a different game. Let's play Clue or go outside and play basketball. And that's the sort of transcendent kind of change that is possible, not always achievable, but is possible through this process. And I've presented this in a very linear way, but there can be sort of back and forth between these different forms of discourse, and there are good and bad forms of them. And they all are important in the context of deliberative citizenship. So as you might imagine, so deliberative citizenship comes out of when we have deliberation and citizenship come together, where we use those forms of discourse for the purposes of solving our collective problems together. And then when we do this together, when we all practice this, then we sort of can form what we often call deliberative democracy. Now, what is this? So deliberative democracy is based on several basic principles. So the first is a sort of reason-giving requirement, that we provide reasons to one another for why we hold the positions that we hold, that those reasons are accessible, that we use language not too scientific, not too technical, maybe not too religious, that others who don't come from the same backgrounds as us can understand, and that you come to a binding decision. It's not just talk. There is a decision that's made, but that it's dynamic. We might return to that decision at some point when we learn new things or we come up with new arguments. And we do this in order to encourage a more public-spirited perspective, to promote the legitimacy of collective decisions, and to promote mutually respective processes of decision-making. So even if I don't get everything I want from the decision, it doesn't go exactly my way, I trust the process, and I trust next time that maybe it will go closer to what I was thinking is in my best interest. And then finally, it allows us to correct mistakes. We learn, we provide reasons, and this is a continuous and iterative process. Another way to think about this is through the lens of argument and a kind of dialectical view of argument, not as a bad thing, yelling and screaming at each other, but as actually good and a critical part of democracy. So Scott Aiken and Robert Talisse talk about argument as an attempt to rationally resolve a disagreement and answer critical questions. And the democracy is the social and political arrangement that allows us to do so. It allows us to pursue the cognitive goal of collectively living together according to our best reason. So argument as foundational to democracy. And so we can think of it as a form of decision-making in which decisions are the product of fair and reasonable discussion and debate among citizens. It's a school of thought. There's a whole literature on this. There's you can consider it a type of governance. It's also an empirical claim, like maybe there are actually some, polities or organizations that practice this. But I like to think of it primarily as an aspirational goal, something we're all working towards as we try to live in a very pluralistic society. And it plays out in a lot of different ways. It can play out in conversations between citizens. themselves. It can play out between policymakers, right? The aspiration is Congress is the greatest deliberative body on earth, aspirational goal. And then also between citizens and policymakers. And then also want to note here, I'm using citizens in a very broad sense, not in a sense of like who holds what passport or piece of paper, but in a broader sense of that the global citizen, from local citizens all the way to the, world context of people who are working together directly or indirectly to solve problems together. And so why is this important? Well, for a variety of reasons. One is that it's maybe intrinsically good. It's good for people to talk to each other and understand one another. That even if there's no sort of other outcomes, that's a good. But that also it has some extrinsic benefits, that it helps us govern better, it helps us come to better decisions and solve our problems more effectively. And then also, and perhaps as or more importantly, that it recognizes the limitations of what we call aggregative democracy or voting. That voting is fundamental to democracy, but maybe it's not the first thing we should do. Maybe we should talk to each other first before we go into that voting booth, so that we can understand and maybe change our minds, and others may change their minds as they hear our reasons, and then we vote, right? So they're complementary ideas or ideals of democratic governance, and they can really support each other. So that's the sort of ideal, that's the kind of background, but it's not always easy, right? The deliberative democracy often faces very turbulent seas. And why is this? Well, there's a lot of reasons. One is that this is difficult, right? The challenges that deliberative democracy and deliberative citizenship are themselves very challenging and very difficult. And then the work of doing deliberative democracy and deliberative citizenship is itself also difficult. Why? Well, there's some general challenges, right? The hyperpolarization and hyperpartisanship we're facing, the lack of engagement with different viewpoints, the siloization, the dehumanization of the other, missing opportunities that we have this kind of big sort going on where we don't really engage with people who differ from ourselves. And then that leads to kind of idea and policy stagnation, and then it's confounded by disinformation and misinformation. So those are some general challenges. And then the specific challenges that deliberative Democrats face. And there's another stream of philosophy we call civic republicanism. And so civic Republicans, small r, small d's face is capacity, right? There's some skills involved in this work. There's resources needed. There's time required. And there's inequities to overcome. Some people are just, have more education, more background in doing this work, maybe are just more drawn to it, and others aren't. And so those are all kind of challenges that we face. And so now we come back to Micah and ask, what would he say in this context? What perspective would he bring? And we're led to what he, I'll come to that slide in a moment. But to back up a little bit, the biblical context here, is he's angry. He says God is angry. And there's a lot of, external challenges, external obstacles, we can say. There's a lot of things going on in society like that I just mapped out, right? But a long time ago, very similar. But then there's also internal challenges, right? So that we personally face, that we face a lot of anger. We feel a lot of anger towards others, maybe even a sense of kind of vengeance. And then it's difficult for us to reach out to the other side, to show mercy, to show kindness to others, and to show humility, that we already know what is right, right? I don't need to necessarily listen to the other side. I know they're wrong. And there's some pride involved in that. And this comes from, again, some of our religious commitments often, our political commitments, our social commitments. And so there's this sense of conflict, of adversarial sort of debate and contestation. And Micah, in this context, he's angry, right? But what does he say God says to do? And what does he say God is going to do? What does he says God should that we should do? He says, this is Micah 4:3, he shall judge among many people and rebuke strong nations afar off, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So there's this anger, this energy, but then it's moved towards peace, not towards conflict. And then he asks in one of my favorite sort of, and I'm not an expert on this, but one of my favorite sort of passages in the Bible, is he asks, what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? So again, this kind of sense of sacrifice and kind of giving oneself, giving offerings to God for these transgressions. But Micah says, no, he has told you, O mortal, and this is what is often called, and I'll go to the next slide here so you can see it as well, what is good? And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So, and that these things, these three sort of values come together to get justice, mercy, and humility. And this is hard, right? I mean, it sounds good, but it's hard because, we feel there's a lot of historical injustices. There were in Micah's time, and we want to do something about it. And it's often seen in opposition to mercy. We need to enforce the law, right? We need to punish those who have done these gross crimes. And then we also, sort of have to think about righteousness. What does that mean, right? That seems like it's this sort of sense of going out and doing justice and sort of making things right. But it actually starts within, right? Righteousness within, before you can go out and make those changes in the world. And so it's this idea of moving from kind of disproportionate retaliation to proportionate retaliation to disproportionate love. And then thinking of justice not as this hard sword, but as power rightly tempered by love. And so this is the work of deliberative citizenship, right? We often have, all sides have many kind of pre-existing biases and concerns about what the other side is doing. And it's hard to come to the table, to join others who you disagree with at that table. And I know a theme of this series is on, welcoming people to the table, a seat at the table. And so the challenge and opportunity of deliberative citizenship is to do this work, is to welcome people to this table so that you can have that conversation. And so now I'd like to share a little bit about how we're trying to do this with the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative at Davidson College. And I have actually a short little video that hopefully will work. If I can make this go to the next page. And it's about 2 minutes long or so. So it's just an efficient way to kind of summarize what we're trying to do. And then I'll share a little more afterwards. So here goes.
Our contemporary public sphere is in crisis. We have deep concerns about our society, and yet we feel unheard and unrecognized. We want to understand the concerns of others, and yet we are anxious about interacting with those whom we disagree.
We feel that our civic life has become so fragmented that we are incapable of engaging with one another on the issue.
Sorry about that. I think it's on a timer and let me start over.
We want to understand the concerns of others, and yet we are anxious about interacting with those whom we disagree.
We feel that our civic life has become so fragmented that we are incapable of engaging with one another on the issues that most animate and trouble us. Simultaneously, our conception of citizenship has become infected by provincialism and pettiness. Instead of bringing us together around a shared sense of identity, it has been subsumed by divisive debates about who counts as citizens.
Rather than conceiving of citizenship as an uplifting set of fundamental rights and responsibilities that we hold in common as we face our collective challenges together, we have reduced it to questions of geography, ethnicity, and immigration status.
Against this backdrop, Davidson College has initiated the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative, or DCI, a campus and community-wide project focused on the uses of deliberation as an alternative to the non-constructive crosstalk that has come to dominate our public discourse.
The purpose of the DCI is to create opportunities for Davidson students, faculty, staff, alumni, and members of the wider community to productively engage with one another on difficult and contentious issues facing our community and society. It aims to teach deliberative skills like actively and empathetically listening and rigorously and respectfully expressing one's own ideas. It works to reinforce humane instincts like open-mindedness, humility, and an action orientation that make robust public discourse possible. It aspires to catalyze creative solutions to our greatest challenges, analyze the deliberative process itself so that we can continually improve it, and create a strong, deliberative community.
Such a community welcomes, rather than fears, productive disagreement and good argument, which lie at the heart of intellectual and democratic life. We welcome you to join this community, our community, and participate in any of the DCI's co-curricular, curricular, or community-based programs, from its deliberative forums, deliberative D teams, deliberative pedagogy collaborative, or its deliberative citizenship fellows program.
Help us build our democracy together, one conversation at a time.
So that's a little background for you, and I can go in a little more depth and some updates on what we've been doing recently. But to start, sort of the video mentioned this concept of humane instincts. And this is actually embedded in Davidson College's statement of purpose, which is to assist students in developing humane instincts and creative and disciplined minds for lives of leadership and service. And I like to think of humane instincts, and we can think of them as other words. Humane as other words like values or virtues, and that they transcend any particular tradition. Right here is just four of many possible traditions you might think of that have these kind of instincts embedded in them. The Greek cardinal virtues, Confucian virtues, Christian virtues, Hindu dharmic virtues. They're all sort of relevant to the work of deliberative citizenship. And they support what we call deliberative dispositions, starting with a commitment to egalitarianism, that everyone has a right to be at the table, to share their views at the table once they're there, a commitment to humility, to realizing that, I'm going to fix that real quick, because it's getting annoying. Okay, we're back. So the humility that we all don't, sort of have all the answers, that we're open-minded, we're curious, we anticipate disagreement, and we're sort of excited about it. It's a gift to be able to engage with someone who disagrees with us. And then we show empathy and kindness towards everyone at that table, and charity and grace. When they say something that maybe, isn't so clear, or, rubs us the wrong way, that we give them the benefit of the doubt. But we also have an evidential emphasis. We look for the reasons why we and others hold the positions they do. And there's an engagement there. It's not just talking past one another. And there's an orientation to our broader, common public goods. It's not just about ourselves, although our own interests are important, but we're trying to think about the broader community. And we're attentive to new ideas, new opportunities to do so. And that there's an action inclination, that it's not just talk, that deliberation is a critical aspect of citizenship, but it is not the only aspect. There are many other things that we can and should be doing, including voting, including protesting, donating, spending our time and our resources in supporting that work that we've been talking about. And then that provides the foundation for our conversation agreements that we all agree on when we enter into these conversations: being authentic and respectful, being an attentive and active listener, being a purposeful and concise speaker, approaching fellow deliberators' stories with curiosity, not hostility, assuming the best and not the worst about their intentions, demonstrating intellectual humility, recognizing that none of us have all the answers, and that we don't know when we're wrong. So we need to be particularly open-minded. Critiquing the idea we disagree with, not the person expressing it, and practicing empathy. Noting areas of both agreement and disagreement, that we shouldn't expect to agree on everything, but maybe on some things we can find areas of commonality. Respecting confidentiality of the discussion, especially important in the age of social media. Avoiding speaking in absolutes, like all people or all Democrats or all Republicans think this. So those are the specific content of these agreements are not as important as the practice of doing it and coming to some shared understanding of what guidelines we're going to try to follow in the conversation. And in that conversation, we're going to practice some deliberative skills. We're going to listen. We're going to acknowledge perspectives. We're going to use I statements. We're going to share our personal stories. And we're going to try to preface strong opposition when we feel like, oh my God, I really disagree here. It's like, okay, I'm going to sort of, say, I like hear where you're coming from, but I kind of disagree strongly with this. What I say might come out a little too strongly, and I apologize in advance, but here's what I think. Avoid derogatory language, and then complete your thought, right? Have that confidence to make your claim, right? And then have others respond to it. And then that's how you really have kind of real authentic engagement. And so we do this through a range of different ways. So a core part of our program is our fellows who are trained in how to facilitate these kind of conversations. And these are students who go through an intensive training program that is also open to the broader public. So we have staff and faculty and community members and alums participate in this 2-day training that it's very hands-on and interactive. And then those fellows and trained facilitators then serve as facilitate conversations as part of our deliberative forums. And we've done them online, like this one on our housing future. We have a panel of experts with diverse views on the topic. And then in the second half, the audience gets to deliberate among themselves about the topic, learning from, building on the conversation of the panelists. This is one we actually just did last week on the challenge for democracy. I was moderating a panel of my colleagues who have expertise in Africa, Asia, and Europe on the question of to what extent should democracies promote and defend democracy around the world. And you can see we had a great turnout of both students and non-students at the event. We also host what we call deliberative D teams, which are small group discussions of 7 to 10 people who talk about topics together over the course of a semester. So 3 times every couple weeks, they get together and they can get to know each other and trust each other a little more to really share what they really think about these topics. And so I mentioned abortion. So actually, starting Monday, starting their second round of meetings this fall, they're going to be talking about abortion, and especially in the context of sort of a post-Dobbs world. We also include deliberation across the curriculum. So some classes actually encourage or require students to take part in those D-team conversations. And then we have a several and growing number of faculty who are embedding deliberation directly into their courses. So taking kind of discussion to a deeper level of engagement. And that is through our deliberative pedagogy or deep collaborative. And these are pictures from our workshop this summer, which included 22 faculty members from 13 different institutions across the country, North Carolina, the South, and beyond. And they're all working on developing their own courses that embed more deliberation into them. And it's very interdisciplinary. We have a biologist, a dancer, several economists, political scientists, philosophers, a whole range of disciplines represented. It's really exciting and really cool what they're doing. This is the third year that we've done it. And it's continuing with the support of the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations. And then finally, I'd be remiss to mention, we're trying also to empower and enable others to do this work in their communities. And so we've had a great partnership with Davidson College Presbyterian Church, where several of their pastors have been very active in the DCI, and several of their congregation members have participated in our training program, and they've developed their own program called DCPC Conversations, Bridging the Gap, to stimulate, to catalyze conversations on difficult topics within their congregation. And so they have trained facilitators now, and they've designed, with a little bit of help from me, but it's mostly been them, design their own conversations. They did a series last spring on, just sort of the role of the church in public life. And now this fall, they've begun talking about specific issues. And in October, they had a forum on how should people of faith respond to gun violence. And this is maybe more challenging than you think, because you've got to design it in a way where people who maybe disagree, pretty strongly on this issue, right, can come together and feel that they're welcome at the table. People who are, more in favor of gun rights, and then more in favor of gun regulation. And so that's the work, and people are doing it at Davidson College and all around the country. I was just at a conference in Atlanta, the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, hundreds of people there, not just in academia, people around the country, even the world, doing this work. It's not often very sort of known or on television, but it's happening, and it's important, and you all can get involved if you're interested. And we get great feedback on this work that we're doing. So students cannot speak highly enough of my experience. An alum, last night was one of the most productive of these kind of conversations that they've had. And then a Davidson residents, the DCI has allowed me to have more confidence in terms of reaching out to people with whom I don't agree, so that we can have those conversations. Not that minds will be changed, but I will have a better understanding. And hopefully the other party will feel like they've been heard. So this is not easy. There's a lot of obstacles. There's a lot of lack of humility out there, lack of justice, lack of kindness and mercy. But our hope is that by setting the table well, by deliberating together well, and orienting citizens towards their role, their responsibility in helping solve problems together, that we're able to sort of increase the levels of humility, justice, and kindness in our communities, and bringing them together. And I'll end with a different sort of section of the Bible from Matthew, the final 4 Beatitudes, which I connect with those 3 parts of the Great Requirement. Starting with justice. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Humility. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And then the final beatitude, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. And that really is the work that deliberation is doing, is bringing all those together and trying to help people come together and solve the challenges that face our society today. So with that, a few resources for you. Our website, deliberativecitizenship.org, but there's lots of other organizations doing this work. Braver Angels, Living Room Conversations, the National Issues Forum, Institute. Baylor University has a public deliberation initiative that has lots of materials about faith and public life, faith and deliberation. And so I encourage you to sign up. You can sign up with DCI, but also any of these other programs and efforts, because we're all sort of sisters and brothers in this effort. And then build your skills and host your own deliberations in your congregation and elsewhere. And so with that, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions in the time that we have remaining.
Professor, thank you so much. This is incredible work. And as you were talking, I was thinking about all the many, many arenas in our country and the world where this work would do such immense good. I'm wondering, since you're on a college campus and you're doing this work on a college campuses have become incredibly fraught locales for having conversations, or rather not having conversations on any given issue. And it seems like that has gotten worse in recent decades. I'm wondering how you do you see the work of these groups sort of seeping out into the general population of Davidson?
Yeah, so I think what we're a relatively young organization, so we've been doing this since 2019, and there are programs that have been engaged in this difficult work for decades, since really the 90s and 2000s. And so what we try to do is kind of build on what they've learned and what they were doing. And what we sort of figured out, was that, some places do a really good job with, like, in the curriculum, and doing it in the classroom. Some do a really good job with the community, doing work in the community. Some do a great job with co-curricular efforts. But our sense was that, it's maybe best and better, if you can, to take a more holistic and comprehensive approach where we try to do all these things and they sort of reinforce each other. And so, we have, like, just the forum we had last week, we had almost equal numbers of students and non-students. So students who were coming for classes or just their interest, and then community members and alums who were signed up, both online and in person. And they get to have this conversation across generations, really. And our D teams as well, 18-year-olds talking to 80-year-olds. And that's just really cool to see. And sort of both sides, really appreciate this opportunity. The older participants, they love hearing from students and what they're sort of thinking about. And then the students love to have these conversations as well, because we've had several of our fellows write their blog posts about this, how meaningful it is for them, as well as the participants, because a lot of the students, they have not had these kind of conversations where they're treated as peers. So they often talk with their parents or their pastors or their teachers, and they're kids, right? And it's understandable, that there's just that sort of pre-existing relationship. Here, they're adults, they're all adults talking together, and that's really meaningful. So I think, to answer your question, I think it's one conversation at a time, right? It doesn't happen overnight. But I think it is, and we really emphasize the process, the procedural aspects of it, that it's really important to talk through those conversation agreements. At each conversation, you need to remind yourselves, and I, say, they go around and everybody sort of, says them, so that you kind of put this hat on, this deliberative hat on, and step into a kind of different identity, a different persona. And that hopefully, and we've had fellows tell us this, that, it's, who've been trained in these methods, they go home to Thanksgiving, right? Or they go home to, see their parents or other relatives or friends, and who they maybe have some fraught relationships with. but they come at it with just a different attitude, and that affects the relationship. It improves it improves Thanksgiving dinner, actually. And it's just great to hear and great to see. And it's, again, not going to happen overnight, but it's one conversation at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that it is one conversation at a time, and probably patience with the process is part of what we need to cultivate as well. I want to invite questions from our online and in the room audience. If you are joining us online, you can email me at mward@stbarts.org, or you can put your questions in the comments or chat section, depending on which platform you're on. If you're in the room, I think there's someone in the room with you with question cards, and they can you can pass your questions to that person, and they will get those questions to me. And we do have a few more minutes for questions. Here is one question that I had, and that has also come in from one of our online viewers, about reaching out to people who really don't want to hear your point of view. They are pretty dug in, and the listening is one-sided. And I'll flip the coin and say, sometimes we may be the ones who don't want to listen. But how do you deal with how does deliberation work? Or does it work in a situation where one side is absolutely dug in and isn't willing to listen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a challenging one. I think you mentioned patience, right? So my grandmother used to always say, patience is a virtue, Graham. It's like a little kid, like patience is a virtue. And I think that's very relevant here. And I was at a conference this summer, and there was a African-American pastor there. As the context was talking about, democracy in a multi-religious, multiracial society. And he's very committed sort of to the progressive causes, and yet he talked about something called revolutionary patience, which I thought was a very, many of us thought was a very interesting and paradox to think about, right? So revolution is seen as like, we need it now, yesterday, and yet recognizing that it takes time, and that some of this stuff is going to take years, even decades, and so I think that's true in the interpersonal context as well. And so you may not have a deliberation right away. It may be more of that one-sided dialogue, monologue. But the hope is that, over time, as you demonstrate, those values, those virtues, that it becomes infectious. Virtue is, we had a speaker here last week from Duke University saying, virtue is contagious. And that, as you demonstrate those values, you don't react, right? And you just tell me more. Let me understand. Why do you think that? Why do you hold that belief? And then, at some point, most people will be like, wait, I should be asking questions here. I should, do the same thing. And not always, and we have limited time, et cetera, but, trying to do what we can to sort of model that approach. And I mean, this sort of radical example is Daryl Davis. If those of you who don't know, African-American musician who has engaged with KKK members, and he has a closet full of Ku Klux Klan regalia that former KKK members have given to him based on following conversations, often that were years in the making, where he, essentially through demonstrating these virtues, persuaded them, to sort of give up their approach to race and ethnicity in America. So, that's a pretty radical thing. But I think and not all of us can do that. But I think the ethic is there, the ethos is there that we might try to emulate at least a little bit.
That is quite extraordinary. It brings to my mind another question that's come from one of the members of the audience. How do you decide on topics for conversation? Do you start with easier ones and work up to the harder ones, or how does that work?
Yeah, so yes, I think so. And so I mean, there's a specific, how do we select topics? We have a process where we, sort of ask our fellows and participants, like, what are they interested in talking about? Then we can kind of compile them into a survey and then put that survey out and then see the results. And then we kind of decide what's most salient and sort of projecting forward. What do we think is going to be salient this semester or next year, say as an election approaches, for example. So last year we had a whole series on elections and voting because it was 2022 election. I think, though, in interpersonal context or in a congregation, I mean, it's the same kind of basic principle. What are people interested in? There's a little bit of a balance, right? Picking something that's ripe, right? Ripe for deliberation, not, too hot, right? Too emotional, and then not as something that's boring, right? There's no disagreement. We all agree on that. So why do we need to deliberate about it? That's, it's an art more than a science. But I think those are some things to think about.
They're good guidelines. You mentioned in your talk, and you just mentioned like the idea that if, with an election year coming up, you might bring up topics related to government or voting. And in your talk, you talked about people's civic responsibilities and their rights and responsibilities as citizens. It seems to me like there's a lot of talk about rights, but not as much talk about our responsibilities as citizens. Do you think, and I know there's some conversation about a lack of education in civics, and we are not really informed about how the government even works or what our responsibilities are as citizens. Do you think that would help? And do these conversations help enlighten people about the responsibility side of their rights and responsibilities?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I'm a political science professor, right? So I teach courses in this area. I teach American politics, and questions about civics comes up a lot. There's an element of civics in my American politics class. The sort of old school civics of just knowing how the American government works is really important. But I think increasingly we're seeing it's not enough, right? We have to sort of also think about how we as citizens, engage with that system. And how we can do that. Russell Dalton, the political scientist, has this kind of idea of sort of duty-based citizenship and engaged citizenship. And they're both important, having that sense of responsibility, but it goes beyond just voting, right? It goes beyond, even just, writing, letters to your senator or congressman, that member of Congress, that it's broader than that. It can be working with community organizations, right? Volunteering, that kind of work too, and understanding that as part of our responsibilities. And then in the context of deliberation, one thing is, like I said, action orientation. So at the end of all of our deliberations, we share what we call a pathways guide. So you get a deliberation guide, and then afterwards you get a pathways guide, which provides a range of different ways by which you can follow up on the conversation, just to learn more, to get connected, or to get engaged. And it's nonpartisan. There's, sort of options from across the political spectrum. But the idea is to orient us, towards that engagement, that civic engagement, that really defines what kind of a fulsome sense of citizenship is about.
Well, that's what we need. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, it looks like we're just about out of time, and we've got to head to the 11 o'clock service. But Professor, thank you so much for being with us. I wish we had more time to continue this conversation, because it is work that we all need to be doing right now. So thank you so much for your presentation, and thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to follow up, with anyone who wants to learn more. And again, you can learn more, right away at our website at deliberativecitizenship.org. So thank you for having me, and good luck with the important work and of setting the table and welcoming people to the table, at St. Bart's.
Thank you so much. So next week, we will be back in person in the Great Hall, where we will welcome our own Reverend Molly O'Neill Frank, and her colleague, Stephen Douglas, who serve as hospital chaplains. And they're going to be in conversation talking about surfacing hope at the end of life. So we hope you'll join us then. In the meantime, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.